Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with this Care Connection today and have Lynn Harper with us. You guys can also see her link to her book. It's going to be in our chat right on the side if you see it. Now, during this presentation, as Lynn is talking, you guys are muted, but if questions come up, for us during the Q&A, put it in the question section as well as the chat box. And we will get to it towards the end. So without further ado, because I'm just so excited, I want to give you as much time as possible. We have Lynn with us here today.
Thank you, Kara. I'm just so excited to be here and so grateful for everyone who's joining today, knowing that dementia is not just any topic for conversation, that it touches us very personally, either if you yourself have a diagnosis or you have friends, family, you're in a caregiver role, professional role. We know that dementia is not just any topic for conversation. I think there's a reason we're not gathering today to have a workshop on, say, spirituality and arthritis, although we may. There's something about dementia that particularly hits to the deepest parts of who we are or who we think we are. I always say that heart disease impairs circulation, kidney disease impairs filtration, but brain disease impairs communication. And often communication is what we think of as the bedrock of our humanity. So dementia confronts us with the fact of our humanness, that to be human is to be vulnerable, even in our most cherished capacities. Dementia, perhaps more than any other condition, brings our fundamental lack of ultimate control over our lives and their ending to a head. My journey with dementia began about a decade and a half ago when my grandfather, who's now deceased, we became involved, my family, in the day-to-day care. He had Alzheimer's disease. My journey in professional ministry, I am a minister at the Riverside Church, led me to serve, first of all, 7 years right out of my chaplaincy training as a chaplain at an interfaith, continuing care retirement community. And within this community was an assisted living and skilled nursing facility called the Gardens. And within the Gardens was a dementia unit with about 40 residents. I've since left the Gardens and now, as I say, serve as the minister of older adults at the Riverside Church in New York City. So I'm no longer on the dementia unit, but I continue to know and support elders and their loved ones who are living with dementia. And in recent years, I've had the opportunity to focus my energies on completing a creative nonfiction book called On Vanishing, Mortality, Dementia, and What It Means to Disappear. The book draws on my personal and professional experiences, seeking to pull dementia out of the narrow world of disease and diminishment and into a broader space of empathy, hope, and common human experience. So if I can rewind a bit and go back to my first day on the dementia unit, my first day of work at the Gardens. A very kind administrator took me on a tour of the facility. And when we got to the 4th floor, the dementia unit, he said to me, "You probably won't spend much time here." And so immediately I was given the story, the instruction that these people didn't matter as much as those who could remember my visit after I left. And so this is something that reflects a larger culture that we live in, that we envision people with dementia often as having disappeared from themselves, and thus we, those of us who are temporarily able-brained, are invited to sort of disappear from them. And it somehow doesn't matter. We won't be impacted by their absence, and they won't be impacted by ours. But all of this changed for me as I came to know people as people, not as a blur of disability, as a blur of dementia, but as individuals with histories, preferences, names, with people who desired to love and be loved, to know and to be known. People with as vital spiritual life as yours or mine. People named Ellen and Claire, Jim, who wrote poetry, Clara, who reached out from her reclining wheelchair and touched staff as they walked by if they leaned close enough. Every Thursday afternoon, I had the good fortune of facilitating a Bible study. I'll loosely define that, with a small group of residents on the dementia unit. It began with Betty, who was always in her wheelchair going up and down the aisles with a Bible in her lap. And one day, for lack of want of a better idea, I asked Betty if she'd like to start a Bible study, and she did. So she and I would co-teach every Thursday. We would read stories, we would laugh, we would sit in silence. And it was in this group that eventually morphed into kind of an interfaith spirituality group as our Jewish friends and Roman Catholic friends and others joined. Taught me what it was to value compassion over cognitive capacity. I remember one day when Greta, a new member to the group, joined us on the fourth floor group, and she said, "The doctor told me I forget a lot of things." And Mary, one of the group stalwarts, said, "That's okay. We all forget a lot of things. The person you're sitting next to probably forgets things too." And then Ellen, another group member who was in a reclining wheelchair, said, "Oh yes, I think it's good to have a blank slate sometimes." It was this exchange. Is it not a spiritual exchange? How each supported the other, saw the other, heard the other, and offered their compassion, their grace, their empathy, and understanding. They've taught me that you don't have to have it together all the time, and how important our spirituality is to this journey we call dementia. And so I'd like to move into some slides, and then I hope to have time for conversation. Please feel free to use the chat as you'd like or make notes. I look forward to learning from you, as I know we're all on the dementia road together. So let me share my screen here.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
We're going, Kara?
We're
All
going.
right.
Perfect.
Okay. Great. So we can see. All right. So, I just snuck this photo in. This is us on our fourth floor dementia unit interfaith spirituality group. So I like to give homage and honor to these wonderful women in that group. So spirituality, I know that can be sort of a daunting term. Like, what is spirituality? Here are a few definitions that might be helpful as we think about it as kind of a broad umbrella under which particular faith communities fall and other kinds of spiritual practice. So spirituality, according to author Philip Zelinsky, is pertaining to the bedrock of human existence, why we are here, where we are going, and how we can comport ourselves with dignity along the way. Another definition comes from a priest and a gerontologist. That which is essential to our humanity, embraces the desire for meaning and purpose, and has personal, social, and transcendent dimensions. So we see those first two definitions, the sense of what is essential to our humanness, our human existence, the who, what, where, that involves meaning and purpose. That's not only private, but also has social dimensions, relationships, friendships, and also the transcendent, sacred, what some would call God. So it's related to one's connection with self, others, nature, and the sacred or God. I wanted us to hear from the voices of people living with dementia, not only my voices. These are the real experts. This is Christine Bryden, who's an author and dementia activist. And this is an excerpt from an article she co-wrote. And this is what she says. "I might have difficulty feeling the presence of God or being able to speak the words of a prayer in my mind, but I can commune without words As my cognition fades, my spirituality can flourish as an important source of identity. As I lose an identity in the world around me, which is so anxious to define me by what I do and say, rather than who I am, I can seek identity by simply being me, a person created in the image of God. I love how Christine says, even though my cognition fades, my spirituality can flourish. So we'll talk some today about how to promote that flourishing. But first, I think it's important to talk about what gets in the way of this flourishing. What are the barriers to promoting positive relationships, promoting spiritual flourishing? And so before we kind of move on to hope, we've got to kind of go down in the valley a little bit. So I hope you'll hang on tight. We're going to talk about Dementism. Dementism isn't maybe a household term for us. We've heard of sexism and racism and other forms of discrimination, but Dementism is a term coined by bioethicist Stephen Post, and he calls it the prejudice against the deeply forgetful. And those who've spent any time around dementia care and are attuned to our culture know that it's kind of everywhere we look, and so sometimes it's hard to even see. So Dementism promotes a kind of stigma. It reflects and reinforces stigma. The classic definition of stigma from Irving Goffman is when a person is reduced by others from a whole and usual person to a tainted, discounted one. And so we see that in the world of dementia, where people delay getting a diagnosis or they hide a diagnosis, where people feel embarrassed or ashamed in a way they wouldn't about another disease. When I spoke with you about my initial tour of the dementia unit, and I was told I didn't need to spend much time there, that suggests a kind of stigma. My friend Kate, who has dementia, says that she hides her diagnosis if she goes into the hospital for something else, for another procedure, because she says the minute I tell them my dementia diagnosis, I get ignored. And so that's the stigma, and it's the air we breathe. Another manifestation of dementism is something called malignant social psychology. That's a mouthful. We don't need to remember that term. But Tom Kitwood, who is sort of the founder of person-centered care and dementia care, he studied very closely how people with dementia were treated. And he listed out 17 what he called malignant behaviors or attitudes toward people living with dementia. And I listed them all here on the slide. But I think what's important to know is that this negative attitude, the negative treatment, actually pushes along people's neurological diminishment. And so this social environment profoundly affects the way people respond, even biologically, with the condition. So I think what we often have with this malignant social psychology, stigma, is we have a defectological approach to dementia. And I'm not saying there aren't real challenges, that there's not real suffering and there's real heartache and difficulty. Don't hear me say that. But the lens that we often use is one that emphasizes defect. So what do I mean by defectological approach? The person with dementia is characterized as solely dementia sufferer, a victim, diseased, and defective. I don't know about you, but I'd rather not be defined by the weakest part of myself. And so why would we do that to others? But we often do that with people living with dementia. We focus on what the person with dementia cannot do, as opposed to what they can do, what remains, or what might be in process of developing. The emphasis is on the seemingly confused or irrational qualities of persons with dementia. And they're often depicted as less than fully human. We hear the terms lost, gone, shell, faded, vanishing. We hear the longest funeral, the death that leaves the body behind. This is language that we use, I think, to try to describe some real losses. But often what it does is it implies that the person is becoming less and less human in their most essential selves. And these negative attitudes and assumptions about persons lead to negative treatment, social abandonment, abuse, and neglect. So we know within our culture that people living with dementia suffer abuse and neglect at a much higher rate than their peers. We also know that people lose friends, report more loneliness. And so it's not only at the level of words, but it's at the level of treatment as well. I wanted to share these two images because we're so used to seeing these in our culture where people are fading away or sort of being blown away, that dementia is depicted as fading the person as person. And so these are the kinds of things we are trying to push back against. John Swinton, who's the theologian of dementia and disability, who wrote this beautiful book called Dementia, Living in the Memories of God. He said the problem is not so much that people forget, it is that they are forgotten. And I know I've seen this in my own work and in my own life, the way people withdraw, including faith communities, sadly enough. And so I think we're gathered here today to be part of the solution, not the problem, that we remember those who have trouble remembering. Let's go back to Christine Bryden and what she says. Christine says, this stigma leads to restrictions on our ability to develop our spirituality. It threatens our spiritual identity. It is assumed that the limits due to our failing cognition place us beyond the reach of normal spiritual practices of communion with God and others. But to what extent are these assumptions due to the limits placed upon us due to the stigma attached to our dementia? And so she's naming outright the stigma. So within a culture of stigma, how do we stay connected and support the spiritual, the fully human? So I'd like to offer us some points for connection and reflection, and of course invite you to think of some too. So this is some of my humble offerings, and I look forward to learning from you too. So how do we stay connected? How do we push back against this dementism that's swirling within our culture? How do we support the spiritual thriving of people like Christine Bryden, and for those of us who don't have dementia, our own spirits as well? Like with anything, with dementia or anything in life, everything should emerge from relationship. So there is not a formula, there's not a trick or a technique for supporting people in their spiritual lives. It must be grounded in relationship and knowing individuals as individuals, their history and preferences, what has been important to the person in the past, and what is sustaining for them now. So relationship is central, not a prepackaged program. So with that said, let's look at some of the ways we can help. The first thing, and maybe the most important, is taking the intentional stance. What do I mean by the intentional stance? Taking the intentional stance involves us, those of us who don't have dementia yet, to engage with the intention to understand. We assume the person is trying to communicate something intelligible, important, and meaningful. That all actions and speech, all attempts at action and speech are meaningful. Even if we don't understand their meaning, they're somehow meaningful, an expression of purpose, of will. The intentional stance emphasizes our readiness to engage, interpret, to receive messages rather than the person with dementia as nonsensical. And so we see how this already pushes back against that defectological approach. Instead of saying, they're so confused, saying, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble understanding. So we take the intentional stance as a way of helping to support people's spirituality. The second thing I'd like to highlight is our use of imagination and empathy, where we take that responsibility to try to understand, to try to imagine the ways our worlds connect, to use that empathic sense of what is the feeling behind the words? How might we imagine that we could have those feelings too, given a certain circumstance? I'm reminded of Veronica, a resident I came to know on the dementia unit, and one day I found her very anxiously by the elevator, and she said, I want to go home, I want to go home, I want to call my son, take me home. And at the time I was perhaps a bit naive, and I bent down and I said, Veronica, this is your home. Well, as you might imagine, that response did not go over well. She actually slapped me. It didn't hurt, but it certainly stirred me awake, because what had happened is I'd failed to step into her world and to affirm her reality as real. This place did not feel like home. It had never been home to her, so why should it now? If I had to do it over again, I probably would have asked her, tell me about your home. And the thing is, friend, I've been homesick myself. I've moved a lot, and someone saying to me, you know what, New York City is your home, isn't all that helpful. So imagining the ways our world connect, to say yes to the scene that's given and to enter in. Okay. I also want to suggest that familiar rituals that engage the senses are so important. In my tradition as a Protestant Christian, that would involve communion, the Lord's Prayer, hymn singing, candle lighting. For other traditions, it might be incense, anointing with oil, holy day meals, holiday meals, celebrations. So when I say rituals, I'm thinking pretty broad about those things in our lives that go way back, that engage us on a deep level and involve our senses and not just cognitive ability, not just words. And so I invite you to think about some of those familiar rituals that might be helpful for you or for those with whom you care. The power of music. I probably don't even need to say much about that. We know the power of music. The late Irish poet John O'Donohue says, music does not touch merely the mind and the senses. It engages that ancient and primal presence we call soul. And if you've seen the documentary Alive Inside, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, I recommend it to you. And it's about the quickening of the spirit that happens. They go into care homes and give people the music that they love and watch people come alive. And so I certainly recommend the power of music. Important images and objects. Those things like here in my tradition, a cross, or even holding a hymnal. Those kinds of things that are tactile. I also, my Catholic friends gave me this, a Mary or a candle. These kinds of things that involve touch and sensory. It might be photographs, a church bulletin, a nativity set at Christmas, a poinsettia, an Easter lily, rosary beads. Again, use your own tradition, your background, knowledge of the person's background to think about what are those images and objects that are those touchstones for persons. Connecting with creation, the beauty of nature. Let's not forget that that's all around us every day. Today is too hot maybe to connect too much outdoors. But how can we use the natural environment to invite people into a sacred space? So I thought we could listen a little bit, hear the words of Robert Davis. He's a pastor who wrote an autobiography about his journey with Alzheimer's disease. And this is what he writes. Truly, I'm finding joy in God's creation. It speaks to me of my Heavenly Father who cares for the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. Believe it or not, I am comforted even by watching National Geographic television shows, as I see the intricately tuned balance of nature with a place for each creature, great and small. I am reassured that God still knows my name, even if I can't hear him in the ways I once did. And so I love this pastor's reflection, because he said in the book, sermons no longer did it for me, and Bible studies just weren't going to cut it, and responsive readings, but nature, these National Geographic shows, being outside, hearing the birds, feeling the cool breeze. These were all ways of connecting. Wanted to highlight something called beautiful questions. We know that when we are communicating with someone with dementia, often it's best to ask questions that are yes or no, that don't hinge so much on someone recalling, say, what did you eat for breakfast, or what did you do yesterday, but the kind of yes or no questions that invite response. Well, Ann Davis Basting, who's a MacArthur genius, who's written a lot about creative care and dementia, she talks about asking beautiful questions. What's a beautiful question? It's not a yes or no question. It's a question that invites more of a spiritual response. So let me give you a couple examples. She says these are invitational questions that give power to the person who's answering them and open up our worlds. Questions like, if your feet could talk, what would they say? What is the most beautiful sound? And can we make it together now? If you could invite someone to our dinner table, whom would you invite? Or as you're looking out a window together or sitting on the porch, what do you see? What do you hear? So these beautiful questions open up space for response. And of course, we must be willing to sit in silence to often receive responses. This can be so hard. It's so hard for me sometimes, because we're trained from an early age to fill the silence, to talk, to ask questions, to be friendly in a certain way. But often when words become harder to access, it's best to take a few breaths, sit in what's called companionable silence, which is the daughter of a resident I knew. That was her term. She would sit with her mother in companionable silence, maybe holding her hand, but not needing to do or say anything important, to offer a peaceful presence. And when it's hard, we can slow down our breath and allow for that sacred silence to take hold. So let us not be afraid of silence, to sit together without needing to fill the space. And finally, I'd like to suggest one way that we stay connected, that we support the spiritual, is faith community and Chaplain. And I understand not everyone has a connection to a faith community. And certainly, that's fine. But for those who are connected with the faith community, and even if the connection has been not particularly strong, or in recent years hasn't been a big part of life, I can tell you as a faith leader, I really, really rely on people letting me know that someone in my congregation needs support, and not at the very end of life, although please let me know that too, but so that I can walk the dementia journey with them and bring the community resources to bear on this journey. So I invite you, no matter how strong or weak that connection is, to invite your faith community to journey along with you. Invite them to stay connected. They may be hesitant or not know how, and you might have to give them a little instruction or hand them a book and help them get educated. But invite them, tell them, because there's so much relational resources there, resources to stay connected with things beyond the cognitive, again, music and rituals. So I invite you to do that. I also mentioned the chaplain. For those of you who are in institutional settings, perhaps in a nursing facility or a hospital or a hospice, a chaplain is an interfaith spiritual presence, someone who is to be there no matter your spiritual path to offer spiritual support. So please utilize the chaplain. Also, having worked in a facility as an interfaith chaplain, I really appreciated there was no such thing as a bad referral. I always said that. People would say, I don't know, he's not that religious. Just please make the referral. Let the chaplain come sit with the person and be a presence and support. Okay, so staying connected, supporting the spiritual, two key questions. And I love to maybe take a moment to linger with these. So each time we're spending moments with people with dementia, maybe we can ask ourselves, what gifts may I offer this person? What gifts is this person offering me that I may receive? So we ask these two questions because often people with dementia, we see them as empty, and those of us without dementia as full. And so we come and pour our fullness into their emptiness. And it's a one-sided way of looking at giving gifts. I have gifts and I just give them to this person. Yes, we each have gifts, but we are also receiving gifts. And these gifts may be hard to name or recognize. But I want us to pause for a minute and think, what gifts have you been given? Have you received from spending time with persons with dementia? Or if you have dementia yourself, what gifts do you have to offer that you'd like for people to receive? And I wonder if we could even use the chat function if you'd like to put a gift you've received.
I have someone who said that they received a smile and a laugh.
Great.
And I have someone else who they said they received more time. So this might have been someone who maybe they just wanted more time with. I have someone who said affirmation.
Yeah.
I've received the gift of being in the present moment. Perspective. This person says they see the Lord through their residence eyes, and it's undescribable glow and brightness.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
We're getting a lot, Lynn. So gift of helping others, gift of friendship, comfort for my anxiety of being with my wife, affection, hugs, gratitude, someone who listens to me. Everything is a gift. Gift of humor, understanding, true joy when I get to walk through the OR. They're going so fast, Lynn. We're getting so many. Yeah, music together instead of tears. Reminder again to be in the present moment. Reading the Bible with my person. My husband's in the early phases of Alzheimer's, but he still can give me good advice. That's so great when I discuss something I might be struggling with. And of course, he gives me unconditional love.
Oh, wow. Oh, this is a gift to me. This is incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. I'm hearing so many, common themes around presence and joy, perspective,
Yeah.
and
Oh, and a sense of divineness is what we have, someone else just said, and what it means to be human and connected at a most basic level of existence.
wow, wow. It, I'm just blown away. When we think about what the culture tells us, and then the story you've just written here in the chat, a story of smiles, of presence, of time, of glow, of brightness, of helping, of friendship, of comfort and support, of human connection, of advice, of unconditional love, of humor, music, all the things that you've listed, you've offered a different story. You've offered a story of hope and connection, and that doesn't erase the hard times and the difficulties, but it says that's not all. That's not the whole story. And we're writing a different one. So, wow, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing those gifts. I'd like to end with a couple slides where we hear the voices of people living with dementia. This is Dr. Jennifer Butte. I've had a chance to meet her on a couple of occasions just through webinars. She's a UK physician, retired now, who has written quite a bit about her dementia journey. And this is her book, Dementia from the Inside. And she's a woman of deep Christian faith. And these are some of the things she has to say. She said it can be a positive journey. It appears that the spiritual being remains true to the end and does not degenerate in the same way as the brain. So I can still show love and care. Dr. Butte also says, and to those of us to whom God is important, tell us of God's unconditional love, acceptance, and forgiveness. We can forget even the basic Christian truths, so remind us of them. And I don't think she's not talking about proselytizing, but remind that God is love. For those for whom this is their tradition, God is love. God's presence abides no matter what. And she says people with dementia should be as important to the church as anyone else. God sees us as complete in Christ, and we are all valuable members of his body. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. Just as important as anyone else. And then we'll close with, and then we'll have a time for conversation and questions. I'd love to hear more from you. But back to Christine Bryden, who's been kind of our guide here today. This is her memoir, her autobiography on her story of living positively with dementia. And this is what she says, and it's such a challenge to me every time I hear it. Why does it matter if I cannot remember, if I repeat myself or forget what you told me? If I enjoy your visit, why must I remember it? Why must I remember who you are? Is it just to satisfy your own need for identity? Your visit is not a cognitive experience that I will store and recall. Let me live in the present. If I forget a pleasant memory, it does not mean it was not important to me. I connect at the deeper level of spirituality. So I treasure your visit as a now experience in which I have connected spirit to spirit. So thank you, friends, for joining me and being a part. I'd love to hear hear your comments, your insights, your questions.
Yeah, definitely. And I thank you for bringing this, conversation. I already feel, more calming, listening to your voice and having this. So, just to start off real quick, because some people are asking about the slides, we will have the slides available. We will email those afterwards. But for now, if you guys have questions for Lynn, this is the time. So I have someone who first asked, what about someone who has tended to be, I think, derisive around spirituality and the mystical. So I guess this person sometimes will use the phrase "foxes are talking."
So the person is antithetical, doesn't want the spiritual. Yeah. And so of course, we respect what people prefer, and we're not trying to push an agenda onto them. And I also come at this as everyone has a spirituality, but it's not always the conventional one. So maybe that person appreciates nature, or appreciates music from Broadway musicals, and not so much maybe hymnody. What are those things that bring that person life and evoke joy, love, peace, a sense of awe? So maybe we could start there without necessarily saying, let's do something spiritual with you, but what are those things that bring peace to that person?
Yeah. And this person actually just let us know that, it becomes difficult because the spouse, the husband, unfortunately is an addict. So he finds it hard to connect. So his behaviors can also be disconnecting at times. So the definitely family dynamics and relationships do play a role in this.
Absolutely. And for that carer, and I didn't really get to talk much about this, the importance of your spirituality and tending to that which is essential to your health and well-being, your peace, your joy, your sense of meaning and purpose as well, is so important. So even if it's hard to get that person to connect, if you can also focus on you caring for you.
Exactly. And sorry if my face looks weird as I'm doing this. I'm just looking at the question. So the next person has asked, what is a helpful way to talk with families who use such terms about their loved ones, like they're fading away or they're disappearing? This person doesn't want to be confrontational with the family or feel like they're correcting them, but just that there's a more compassionate way to express to them.
Hmm. That's a great question. My initial thought is, for one, we model it. And so we use different language. We use people living with dementia. We use that, and we highlight the stories of the person that's not fading. So we lift up the other stories, and the things perhaps that are unrecognized in that person. Because I think sometimes people are so close to it, they only see the loss. But if we can offer another lens and say, yes, I know this is so hard, there's so many losses, but you know what I noticed about Jean? She smiled when I came in, and that made me so happy. Or I noticed that she was swaying to the music, and that must really touch a deep place in her. And it made me think about how important music is in my own life, and that was a gift Jean gave to me today.
Yeah.
So if we can highlight some of those things, and maybe there is a way down the line, depending on your relationship, to say, I've been thinking about the language that I've used in the past, and I've started to transition away from some of those words because I find them not helpful and hurtful. So if we can frame it as I, me, as opposed to you, sometimes that kind of softens it a little. And
Exactly.
it is a journey.
Yeah, and I think that it really is like, right, what can we focus on that the person's doing? They're they're excelling at. Every person, has accomplished something in their life and has achieved things. So I definitely think that's a perspective to be looking at. Next up, I have a question from a gentleman who asks, what are some group spiritual activities that are most meaningful? Is it adapting worship and prayer services, or is it something completely different? Which I know you touched on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's both and. I always think it's, in some ways, it's really, really important for inclusion so that not everything is segregated or that people with dementia aren't ever included in a broader community. So I think that there is an adaptive component for sure. I'd love to see the community whole and together. Those holiday, I think at the Seder meal, we had a woman deep in dementia, and the staff was saying, no, she can't go to the Seder. This isn't going to work. It's going to be so disruptive. She's going to, and well, people fought for her to go, and she went, and the people there, her community was so glad she was there, and were able to embrace her, and it was a lovely time. So that to say, yes, adapt, but also I think there is space for those, like we did on spirituality group. Keep it very simple. Let the group members lead. You will know the people as individuals and what the background they bring. Our particular spirituality group took a bent toward sharing gratitude. We would often share our gratitude, and that was very important for the group every time we met. We would often highlight the seasons, and as the seasons were changing, we'd talk about creation a lot. We'd use music. So I invite you, as you get to know the group, keep it simple, one thing at a time, not a lot of, and allowing for silence. And thank you for that question. Great question.
I think it's great. Just how that you can keep people included, and really just, what can we do to make it easier for that person environmentally so that they can join in? I definitely agree with that. I have someone else who asked, how can we approach a family member that might be in denial that their person, in this situation, it is the parent, but I think we can broaden that to what can we do if the person is kind of, not thinking the other person's going through the disease. I know I forgot a word, sorry.
Yeah, that's tough. And Kara, you might have some insight on that working. Yeah. So if you want to start, Kara, and I can.
Yeah, it's always very, difficult, I think, bringing the information up, to a person who might, for some reason, be in denial. And I don't see denial as being like they don't believe, in the disease, but there's real meaning when someone goes through a diagnosis process, right? There's real meaning when we see the paperwork in front of us. And people have different experiences with relationships. I think we need to think historically what it meant, right? If you got this diagnosis, I've had this on plenty of helpline calls. Someone's like, I don't want to go into a nursing home, but that doesn't necessarily, just because you get the diagnosis, means you're going straight there. And I'm sure you've heard this too, Lynn. So it's really kind of talking about, well, what's your biggest fear if they were to be diagnosed? Right? What's the biggest fear you have if they are living with this disease? Because sometimes we can't make the assumption we know what people are feeling, right? And so if they have scared feelings about this, maybe they've gone through this with another family member, there could be transference of feelings. So I think we just need to be aware that there's a lot of feelings coming into it. And so even if we're starting a conversation off, we need to allow, like what Lynn said, right, a pause. Some of this stuff can be really hard and heavy. So we need to just maybe pause in those conversations at moments.
Mm. Oh, thank you, Kara. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that presence is so important, that you're seeing things that it's hard for the person to see. I can remember this with my mother, with her father who had Alzheimer's, and I talk about him in the book, my grandfather, and I could see things that it seemed like my mom couldn't. And it was because, you know, she's closer to him. And it wouldn't have been particularly helpful if I was like, Mom, don't you see, you know,
Yeah.
because she was walking her own path in her own time. But I think if we can come alongside people and reassure them of our presence, if there's opportunity sometimes to say, I notice something. I notice that so and so's having a hard time. And I wonder how I can help. And again, sort of framing it I, me, as opposed to you. Just one thought.
Yeah. This way the person doesn't feel like it's, all on them. Definitely. And also kind of what you said, Lynn, like this might be an opportunity where if you know your person is spiritual and they might want to seek guidance from like a Stephen minister or a lay leader, right? This is an opportunity now that they are in the beginning of the stages, right? To have those moments and opportunities to really speak about what they're feeling at the moment. And that might be, I've had some people where the approach is they might not want to go to doctor, but they love their pastor. So I was like, okay, the pastor is someone they really admire and they trust. Let's try working with them.
Right. That's great. Yes. Please always include the faith community. And for people on the call today who are in faith communities and are perhaps deeply connected, I encourage faith communities to host educational programs at their church. Have AFA come and offer a tutorial, because that makes it much less stigmatizing when it's in the air, when congregants are talking about it, when pastors are talking about it, and it's not taboo, that you're offering education, you're equipping people to help. That just takes dementia down to earth a little and takes a little bit of the fear out of it. So, yeah.
And I do want to take just a quick moment because, Lynn, we're just getting so many comments. So I just want to share a few of them as we get through the questions. But what a beautiful way to spend an hour. Lynn, thank you for your beautiful presentation and for all of the beautiful personal quotes. Just reminds me that living in the now is really all we have, and those with dementia can be our teachers.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Wow.
And where's this other one? This has really been a great webinar. Wait, no, it just moved. Sorry. Sometimes that happens. This has been a really great webinar. I think our home health aides, would benefit from watching from you. Of course, this is something, we are saving, so that's something they can refer back to. And I'm glad it's something you all feel is touching you to have it. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Lynn, for your book. My wife is in the beginning stages, and understanding this and practical changes that this person can make. My wife and I are so much happier now that I have learned to listen to her.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Such a gift to me. Thank you.
It's very powerful. I have someone who also said that this has been beautiful and very enlightening for them. And I'm glad for that, that we can offer a space where we can have you, Lynn, to come in and, bring this to everybody.
Mm.
Let me see, because I'm still scrolling because we're getting questions. So I have someone who said it's very frequent. This is something happening with the person wanting to go home, because obviously you share the story, and that's such a common one we do hear. But when it becomes persistent and frequent for a long time, and some of the tricks don't work anymore, what else do you think I should give a shot?
Yeah.
That's a
Wow.
one.
That's a tough one. Yeah, because You know, I think sometimes we have to sit with what we cannot fix. And I just want to say to this person, thank you for caring enough to stick with the person, offering your presence. This anxiety, whatever it is around going home, is sounds like a pretty deep one for this person. And I just commend you to continue to try to offer as peaceful a presence as possible, and nurture your own spirit to be able to, take some time away when you need it, step away. And if we can offer a presence that is, the term is like non-anxious, but I
Yeah.
don't think that's possible. I think less anxious. If we can offer a tick less anxious than the person, then in some way, I think we provide a kind of home, and a kind of familiarity and a kind of dwelling place for the person that is safe. So I know that doesn't answer the question or resolve this person's questions, but I would just encourage you to continue to offer that loving presence, doing the best you can, and knowing that that's enough.
And I think there's something that this is a feeling many people experience, whether it's different types of behaviors that come up. And so that those feelings do come up. So I think it's important to address that. At times we might not have all the answers, but the one thing that we do have is we try every day and we get another chance to try.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have someone else who's asked a question. I have a friend with dementia, and she speaks about waking up confused and scared of not knowing where she is. How do I carry on a conversation so she knows she's supported and I hear that she is scared? Because she doesn't want to just, drop the conversation, but wants to acknowledge it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, it sounds like you've got it. You're acknowledging her feelings, her anxiety, and so you're affirming her scene, the improv rules. You're affirming the scene, and
Yes.
and then you're moving on to the conversation, so you don't have to stay there with the anxiety, but to affirm it, and then I'm here now, and you're safe. So now, shall we listen to some music, or yeah,
Yes.
but that you're affirming there, but you're not staying there necessarily. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think you're on the right track.
Exactly. It's really like if they're in that moment, how can we make them feel reassured, right? Just like that, affirm, okay? And then let's see what else we can do during the day. I'm glad you shared with me and you trust me that you tell me you're scared. Do you want me to stay here with you longer? Would you like to do something? I definitely think that's right up the alley. And so, Lynn, I'm also getting more people with comments. So I really just want to share them with you because they're very just so beautifully written. Lynn, I'm grateful to have heard your perspective. You're a beacon of light and empowerment that recognizes the dignity and spiritual essence of persons with dementia.
Wow, thank you.
And thank you so much, Lynn. This has not only been educational, but very personal to me. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I go right along with that, the gratitude of this. Let me see. Beautiful presentation. I have found this to be amazing. What else does this say? And, this is someone who says, I know that being able to be a believer has gotten me through this situation. And it allows a source of hope, the comfort and guidance that she receives through the community.
Wonderful. Great. Well, you give me hope. Each person on this call gives me hope, that you would spend an afternoon, thinking about these things, feeling these things, and not just an afternoon. You're doing the work. You're caring. You're on the dementia road, so to speak, walking this path. And I hope that you know that you do not walk it alone. There are people who care for those who have a particular faith. Like my journey, there's a Holy Spirit is the term we use along with us, but whatever your journey, you do not walk it alone. And so I hope you go knowing that, and that you've touched me deeply today, and I wish you each peace.
Thank you, Lynn. And just a few more, because they're still coming in, but thank you. This has been wonderful. You're amazing. The divine speaks to us all and through us all. Thank you for the valuable insight. I just can't, echo this enough, how, grateful I am to have you join us today, and allow this conversation to happen, and how we approach people, not just as, maybe what disease they're living with, but what they bring to this world, right? How do we make sure they know that they're worth being here, that they have a purpose, and we can make them feel that meaningfulness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right. And the rest of our community is not whole without them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not whole without them. And I think that's also really important to remember, that they were only whole in this together.
You actually just touched me. You remind me of I am because we are from Ubuntu, the phrasing of, right, I'm not here without the people before me, as well as I haven't gotten to where I have been without them. So I think just touched there again.
Thank you.
Well, with that, I want to say thank you again to Lynn for being here with us today. Just a reminder, her link for her book is in the chat. I'm going to be sending out an email with that link, as well as the copy of the slides. And thank you so much, Lynn, for being with us here today. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you all. Take good care. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.